I'm not sure when the first written strategy guide for chess, checkers, Go, Mancala, or other ancient game was put to paper, or parchment, but since the wargame hobby started back in the 1950s, I think we have a decent chance of tracking down something like that. In fact, I may have found the first strategy guide article ever published. I'm going to share the game and the tips described therein, here on Legendary Tactics. I don't know if I have any way of knowing if this is the first ever strategy guide, but it has to be one of the first in the wargaming hobby. It appeared in the very first issue of the General Magazine for Avalon Hill's D-Day, one of the first commercially available wargames of all time. The game was published in 1961 and the strategy guide appeared in May 1963, which meant D-Day was still quite new, but enough time had passed for people to develop some ideas on how to best play the game. For those of you unfamiliar with D-Day, it is a wargame depicting the Allied landings in June 1944 in France and their advance to the Rhine during World War II. It consists of 50 turns, each representing a week of real time. The Allied player must establish a beachhead, break out of said beachhead, conduct a Patton-like dash across France, and sustain 10 divisions across the Rhine against heavy German resistance provided by the other player. Notably, it was the first game to introduce a hexagonal grid to organize the movement of pieces, and includes 195 counters, including blanks. For those of you already familiar with D-Day, you might already be aware of the endless discussions on how to devise a perfect German defensive setup at the start. The game allows for a lot of flexibility in determining how the German player arranges his or her starting forces. While this flexibility is welcome, it also provides an overabundance of choice, not to mention the fact that a mistake in the initial setup might lead to a quick collapse and an easy Allied victory. Buried among the poor formatting and spelling mistakes, on page 7 of that first issue of the General, one can find Plan Red as described by 20-year-old Karl Nabe. At that time he was a junior at Purdue University, majoring in physics and acting as cadet captain in the Air Force ROTC. Because this was in the day before wargames had identification numbers and letters on the hexes, the article uses an opaque organizational system to express the plan. In fact, it was so hard to figure out that it warranted further explanation in the second issue of the General to clarify it. Also, there were some rules variants applied to the strategy, many of which became standard in the wargame genre. First, any rounding of odds is to the favor of the defender. Then, so-called soak-offs, where battles are divided into mini-battles, each with their own odds calculation, cannot be done for odds of less than 1 to 6. Third, unit strength is not doubled in defense across rivers unless they are being attacked from directly across that river. Fourth, if any part of an attack doesn't come from across a river, you use the basic unmodified odds. Fifth, Allied airborne units can't land directly adjacent to a German unit, whether or not it has a zone of control. Sixth, fortress strength is tripled if attacked from the sea and doubled otherwise. Finally, headquarters units are not to be used. The goal of Plan Red is to first make the potential landing sites of Pas-de-Calais, North Sea and Le Havre impossible for the Allied player, and to make Normandy as difficult a landing place as possible. And if necessary, the German player can improve their defense against a North Sea invasion by placing this corps in the northern replacement area instead of the center one. Then the more likely invasion of South France, Bay of Biscay, Brittany, or potentially Normandy will trigger a German withdrawal to a line from the Meuse to Antwerp, known as the secondary defense line, which is the linchpin of the entire strategy. Key to this is an immediate movement of the 6 static divisions to a defensible line behind the Meuse. All units must be in position no later than the 7th week, with a minimal loss of strength in order for this plan to work. There are a couple of instances where losses may be necessary. The first is if the Allies invade at South France. It will be necessary to sacrifice 2 light units of the Southern Reserve Force to slow down the Allies. This loss will be offset by the fact that Allied reinforcement capabilities in South France are weak. This might even result in the Allies having to re-invade in the 16th week to effectively bring in the reinforcements made available at that time in the game. And once the second invasion occurs, the German player doesn't need to worry about defending the North Sea area anymore, and those forces can be used to reinforce part of the secondary defense line. The other is if the Allied player drops paratroops behind this German retreat to the line. The Germans must crush them quickly and with minimal loss, and be careful not to be trapped by overland troops. Any losses can be made up for with the units freed up from their airborne protection role. If this corps screens things properly and with the 4-4-3s moving into position, it should be impossible for the Allied player to land airborne troops anywhere at that point to interfere with the defense. Concentrating heavy units on the southern flank is necessary because of the importance of the Belfort-Epinal section of the line, and that it can be later used to counterattack against the Allied line in a flanking maneuver. If done successfully, the Allies will be in a tough spot. The Meuse-Antwerp line forces the Allied player to fight a set-piece battle at bad odds, where the German lack of mobility is no longer an issue, and forces repeated use of the infamous soak-off tactic to their detriment. Once set, the German player should avoid a game of maneuver, isolated strongpoints, and combat in clear terrain. Always be cognizant of airborne attack, and set up continuous lines behind rivers so as to make the strongest defense. It's difficult to form any sort of constructive defense short of this line because of the longer section of beach to be defended and the lack of good positions to be found once the defense line is breached, allowing the Allies to take advantage of their better maneuverability. Upon some inspection, one might notice an apparent weakness in the south. Looking closer, however, we find that the southernmost point of the defense line is only one enemy turn closer to Vesoul than it is to the Bay of Biscay. A sacrifice of a 3-3-4 and a 2-2-4 around this spot, the 30th grid line, will ensure that the defense line snaps into place before the Allies arrive. Some other principles of the defense. Place weak units behind river lines so that if Allied units are adjacent to them after combat, the weak units are not required to attack. For any exposed strong point that is not behind river lines, place strong armor and infantry so that if the Allies end up adjacent after combat, the Allied player has to take bad odds. Remember that the German is not strong on offense, so avoid counterattacking unless it is necessary to maintain the position, or if the Allied player will likely take a larger loss than the German side as a result. Always fight your battles with a plan for how a potential withdrawal will happen. Plan your moves so as not to deny yourself good defensive positions later. Although the rules in this guide recommend not playing with HQ units, if players feel they need to include them, they should be used by the German player as follows. To help prohibit airborne attack for the initial German placement, to slow the Allied advance through sacrifice, and to help counter an airborne attack during the German retreat back to the secondary defense line, and thereafter behind the German secondary defense line to prohibit Allied airborne attack, which then frees up the troops which would otherwise be slated for the job. And there it is, the first strategy guide article ever. Interestingly, there were another couple of starting setups introduced in that issue, one codenamed Plan Red Face, which was used in a losing game against Lou Zocchi, famous for his design of Luftwaffe, and one nicknamed Chicago Style, which made use of HQ units by a Robert Olson, but neither of them had the in-depth analysis of Plan Red. I'm not sure if there are many players of D-Day these days. However, as we have passed the 80th anniversary of the most ambitious amphibious invasion ever staged, it might be worth taking the time to break it out again and get it to the table. We hope this strategy will help you to win that game. This is Legendary Tactics.